Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're going to learn now the second mimer of the three mamorim in the Yud Beis Gimel Tammuz season of 40 years ago. As we mentioned, the previous mimer of Baruch HaGoimel, the first one, that'll also be the name of the third mimer is also Baruch HaGoimel, like the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe's Rebbe also has two that begin with that in that time. Commemorates the release from incarceration, etc., of the Rebbe's Rebbe, previous Rebbe, 98 years ago. And as we've mentioned, it's 40 years since the Rebbe delivered these Mamorim. And as we stated, the previous mimer, that 40 years ago, on the 12th of Tammuz, the Rebbe delved into a very painful epoch in his leadership of the lack of recognition of his leadership and legitimacy of the Lubavitcher movement, the story known as the books of the Lubavitch Library. Now, 3 days after the Farbrengen of the 12th of Tammuz, the Rebbe held another Farbrengen on the 15th of Tammuz, and in it he spoke much more details. And similar to the mimer that we learned that speaks of the growth of the neshama on this world and the struggles that it goes through, and that even a great tzaddik can participate in this, the Rebbe will bring here some nuances like that we may be able to see, and some I'm sure that we don't see, but it was said as a sicha, like many of the mamorim are in the format of a talk, and not with the whole the delivery of singing the mimer and the Rebbe's eyes closed, etc. We're not going to get into that now, but it's the second part of the Farbrengen. If you want to hear it on Chabad.org, it's available. Again, we're using the version that is in the Toras Menachem Sefer Mamorim Moyadim Yud Beis Gimel Tammuz, and it's of course the same mimer that's in the other places, but it's written a little bit differently. Yehi Elokeinu Emanu kashahoyim aviseinu al yasveinu val yitzenu. This is the verse in Kings, which we, at least in Nuschari, say daily during the week, and we also, this is one of the verses that we say on Simchas Torah before the Hakafas. This comes from Menachem Aleph, from Kings, and the verse begins with the words, "May the Lord our God, may Hashem our God be with us, as He was with our fathers, forefathers, patriarchs, and He shouldn't leave us, and He shouldn't forsake us." Now, there is much history connected with the fact, and the Rebbe will delve into the history a little bit here too, of why he begins the mimer with this, and the connection with that season. But we will also see the connection with the anguished situation which the Rebbe was in at the time that this mimer was delivered. So, Hine, the Rebbe explains, B'posuk zeh, with this verse, Posuk b'chov dalet sifrei kedesh t'teresh b'ksav, it's a verse from one of the 24 holy books of the written Torah. U'b'yachad im zeh harei pashtus inyonei, ein inyin yotze midei poshut here, or pshutei really, that everything has to first be looked at in its simplest way of understanding before you can expound on it. Hu inyin shel tefillah, it's a prayer. So we're asking God to be with us and not to forsake us. Certain times there are verses within the Torah that are prayers. Sometimes it's recording a prayer that was said, and it's also something that we learn about at the same time. Whereas Tehillim, which is also one of the 24 holy books, Tehillim is also, it corresponds to the 5 books of Moses and of the Chumash of the written Torah, and Tehillim has also 5 books in it. But the Tehillim is primarily, the book of Psalms is also primarily prayer. even though it's a book of Torah that has to be studied, prayer that can be studied, but it's also prayer to beseech God. So, Keloshen HaKosov Tefillos David ben Yishai, indeed, like the verse in the Tehillim itself, in the end of chapter 72, where it says, and here the Rebbe doesn't use the first word of that verse, which it's the end of that section, where all the prayers are written by David, but it's referred to as the prayers of David the son of Yishai, meaning David HaMelech, King David. So with this verse, Maschil Chak Moed V'Chomi Bala Ma'aseh V'Geula Sichose Yem Gimel Tammuz Shenir Shema V'Nidvasa B'Kodesh Chag Geula. With these words, the Rebbe's father-in-law, the one who was incarcerated and liberated, begins his talk of the day of the 3rd of Tammuz. And as mentioned earlier, the 3rd of Tammuz was the day that they changed the sentence from the opposite of life to exile. So he had a talk that day because he was told that he had to go that very day to his exile city of Kostroma, and therefore he spoke to the hundreds and maybe thousands that assembled on the platform from the train, and he began his talk with this verse. And he said that this verse is a prayer, and it's also a promise, because the word Yehi means it will be. And not only it should be, but it will be. So this is how he began his talk on that third day, and that talk was written and printed in the booklet that contains the discourses, the Mamorim, of the Festival of the Redemption. Now, it's important here at this point that we're going to read the footnotes, because they are part of the one footnote, number 3, is what the Rebbe said in an earlier Fabrengen, but footnote number 4, the Rebbe actually said as part of the Maimer. So, footnote number 3, that was the beginning of the redemption, the 3rd of Tammuz. But together with that, there was also the opposite, Hascholas Hagolos. He was freed from, heaven forbid, the opposite of life. But it was the beginning of exile, in his exile city. And several details that's even harder than incarceration. The Rebbe said some of this also at this point when he said the Maimer. Like, actually, all of this is what the Rebbe said here in the Maimer, but he refers to what he spoke more at length at the Farbrengen of the 3rd of Tammuz on the Shabbos of Koirach. So even though it was a pivotal stage, it was a freedom from, heaven forbid, the sentence that they wanted to give him, but it was the beginning of something that they thought would be an elongated term of exile. And now in Ha'ora 4, footnote 4, the Rebbe says that it's already been, it was transcribed and printed, published. Therefore, in addition to the words that the Rebbe is going to speak here in the Maimer, that are just the main points, he's not going to delve into it in full detail. Number one, because it's important, is these points that he's going to focus on, these specific lessons, and for several other reasons. And this is a nuance here that I don't know if I could even grasp fully what this means, why the Rebbe says that, but the Rebbe says there are other reasons. But everybody could learn this well-publicized talk of the previous Rebbe. The Rebbe will quote the pertinent parts. Now the Rebbe says something very interesting. If the Rebbe says it here in a Maimer, it gives us this power too. Not just inspiration, but strength to do it. Each and every individual can read it according to their abilities. And like the Rav wanted, the Rebbe is referring to, in an open way, to his father-in-law, his Rebbe, but it's of course the will of the Rebbe too. From everyone's capability, you'll get even higher than one's own capability. In other words, your capability will grow, and you'll be able to go beyond your usual. Even higher than than limitations and measurements. And like the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe's Rebbe stressed in all of his things, that you have to give it your best and go even beyond what you could. And certainly if it's something which is connected with the incarceration and liberation of the prince of the whole generation of a Rebbe, as it can be elucidated even more so, more and more. Now let's go back to the text. So he began with this verse. And then the other discourses that he said were published also. So now the Rebbe says that this booklet, the primary part of the booklet are the Chassidic discourses. But this beginning, which is at the beginning of the booklet, if you really want to see what it looks like in its original format, there is a booklet, a book of Mamorim of the previous Rebbe. It's published in more than one place. So in the Sefer Mamorim Tafresh Pezayin, in the Mamorim of 1927, 5687, it's there too, and it's written there. But if you want to see how the booklet came out in its original format, there is a book called Sefer Mamorim Kuntreisim. It's the booklet of how the original booklets came out, and their reprints. Most of these Mamorim were subsequently republished in their, in the various places where they are in the years, in the order of their years. But in the first volume, you could see how this is the introduction, and you see the bold letters, how these words that the previous Rebbe said at the steps of the train to the assembled there with this prayer of "May God be with us," and that's also when he says the words that only our souls were not taken into exile, only our bodies were exiled. So the Rebbe will quote some more here, but the Rebbe is starting the mimer, the Chassidic discourse, with words that the previous Rebbe said in a talk, which is in and of itself an interesting phenomenon, and it's a certain, I don't want to say the Rebbe according respect, but it's the Rebbe also stressing the power of that talk and beginning a mimer with something that was a talk. So the Rebbe says that although the primary part of the booklet is the Mamorim Avalgam, Haschol Azu Hidvar Teira, but this beginning is also Teira, Shenemar Betachlis Adiyuk Kimoy HaMamorim, which is said with quite specific particularity, like the discourses Sheyesh Lilmim Menachem and Yonev Hoidois, and we can learn from this several things and lessons and instructions. The Yadrab, on the contrary, Yesh Begami Nishal Tefillah, it also has a prayer, and especially in this situation, saying it then was also a prayer. And now remember, we saying that the Rebbe was talking then at a time where the Rebbe was also looking at it as a prayer, because there was a referendum on Lubavitch and on the legitimacy of the Lubavitch movement at that time. This is simple. I'm sorry that I'm inserting it here, but I think it's just very clear here, black and white. We are requesting from whom God may be blessed. Yehi, and the Rebbe says it again, Yehi, Elokeinu, Emanu, may the Lord our God be with us like he was with our forefathers, and more than that, in addition to that, not just be with us. Al Yazveinu Val Yichenu, do not leave us and not forsake us. With all of the lengthy expounding that's afterwards, it's certainly connected to this idea, this nuance of the prayer, and as a result of thinking of this wish that we're asking of God, to the extent that at the end of that whole talk, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe's Rebbe, ends the talk with repeating the verse, like he began the talk, that certainly it will be fulfilled. This is how the Friedrich Rebbe finishes it. Yehi Havai Elokeinu Emanu Kashrayim Avisenu Ayasveinu Al Yichenu. That may the Lord our God be with us like He was with our forefathers. May He not forsake us, not leave us, and not forsake us. And then he adds, and when the Rebbe said this, the Rebbe said, "Svet Eden sein gut." It'll be good for the Jewish people, spiritually and materially. And there in the printed one, it also says with light, with illuminated spiritually and materially. Now, just pointing out here that therefore here we're at this point in the Maimer where the Rebbe has already said this verse 3 times. I just want to point that out. Okay. And afterwards in the booklet come the Chassidic discourses, beginning with the Maimer that was said while he was still in the exile. That the first one is a Maimer that begins with the word that a vineyard will be brought forth from Egypt, which is a poetic verse. And then there's a Maimer which begins with the words, "Blessed is the one who bestows goodness," which was said in his exile place, Gufa. After it was already announced from the government that he would be redeemed in a revealed way and an official way, and then he would have to get his certificate of liberation. That's already a situation that is connected with the obligation then, because now he was attaining full freedom, that he would have to bless, and that's what the Maimer that we learned previously, the first one, and then there's the second one that I was going to talk about also. And since this blessing has to be said when you're completely back to the correct situation, so for instance, if it's a person who wasn't well, he has to say it when he's completely recovered. When it's a person who was incarcerated, it has to be when he attains total freedom. There is the subsequent continuation in the Maimer that begins again with those words, that blessed is the one who bestows to culpable and those that are undeserving goodness, that he has bestowed upon me good. He said it after he actually said the blessing on the Shabbos when he came back to his home. Was after the 15th day of Tammuz, that when the moon is full at the 15th of Tammuz, which illustrates the full potential, because we as a people are compared to the moon, so that shows our full potential. So he said the bracha then that Shabbos morning, and then he said the Maimer, like it says there in the Kuntrish, at the Kiddush, at the Shabbos day Fabrengen. So now the Rebbe continues. Ois beis. Hine betchil as diver maskel gefen Mitzrayim tasiya maybe Maimer Rabbi Seinu v'chachamenu zechreim levracha. The beginning of the Maimer of the Maimer of Gefen Mitzrayim tasiya, that the vineyard from Egypt will be brought forth. He brings the phrase of the sages of blessed memory, regarding the advantageous level of Israel and the Israelites. Gefen Eli Yisrael. What's it referred to when it says a vineyard? That's a reference to Yisrael, Israel. Shaboy mefared gam protein yonim shebegefen shalahem nimshulu prote hasugim shebi Yisrael. There he discusses with the Gemara and the Medrash that talk about this, that speak about the various comparisons of Israel to the vine, and how they are these details are connected and illustrative of special properties. And there it also talks about hashkoilis v'ha'alin v'chulu, the clusters of the grapes and the leaves, etc. So clusters of grapes, shehem talmidei chachamim, That is the students, the sages, the wise students. And then when it talks about the leaves, that's the ignoramuses, those that don't know, that didn't learn. But they're all part of the vine. They're all part of the same vine. More than that. The simplest part protects the part which is the most important. In other words, the leaves protect and shade the grapes which are in the clusters. That there, in regards to this piece, then the protective part of the leaves become a giver, so to speak, to the clusters of the grapes, that they should flourish and thrive. So, in other words, it's the leaves of the ignoramus, so to speak, that are making the growth within the grapes. Not just a plain gift, but the fact that they can be sustained, the sustainability of the most important part happens through the part which is done by the simplest part, because of the protection of the leaves. Like the sage's dictum that's quoted, if not for the leaves, then the cluster of the grapes wouldn't survive. Like the Rebbe explains at length in the discourse. So obviously the whole idea of Torah amongst Israel is specifically the clusters of the grapes, and we even say that if somebody is very multi-talented, multifaceted, and knows a lot, we call them an Ish Eshkoilis. We call him somebody who's has the whole cluster, he has everything with him. Ish, and not only that, the word Eshkoilis, which is the word for the cluster, has in it also like a combination, a word combination, Ish Shakoil Boy. It's like the word Eshkoil, a man who everything is within him. And that's actually, the Talmud already says that. This is one of the descriptions that is said regarding the wise students. To the extent to the ones that especially that were ordained to be able to rule and instruct, as was one from Moses down through the generations. As it's explained in several places in the Talmud. But nevertheless, even though the clusters are what's the main focus here, nevertheless the Torah itself speaks about the advantage of the leaves, that they protect the clusters of the grapes. And without the leaves, without them, the grapes wouldn't be able to be sustained and to thrive. This stresses the idea of the love of Israel. Everyone has a part. And then the Rebbe continues in the Maimer, an additional way that the Jewish people, that the Israelites are compared to the vine, like we learned in the Medrash when you want to improve the quality of the grapes, so you take it out of this soil where it's growing from, it's uprooted, and from this place, and it's replanted, it's transplanted in another place. When the vine is uprooted from one place, from its place where it is, and it's transplanted in a second place, a new place, then the vine becomes completed. In other words, it also gets the minerals of that part of the earth, and it gets more nurtured, and that really makes it a stronger, more quality grape, etc. Similarly with Israelites, the Ashlema, and like Menachem says, you could take this to the bank. The Rebbe says, look how the Rebbe says here, that this is why the Jewish people were exiled. They find themselves in exile. Pirish inyan hagolus ushagolu mehamokum shabayilif nizeh. What does golus mean? What does exile mean? That they were exiled from the place where they were beforehand, which was their main place. Nevertheless, specifically when they were in exile, we have the ultimate happens within the whole vine, in a way that from every single seed which is in the grapes in this vine, another vine can grow. Regarding that, it also says, like the vine which came forth from Egypt, that it makes fruits and the fruits make fruits. Just like light, which can continuously illuminate. One candle could kindle another candle. Ad safe kol olam, to the end of the whole world. In other words, the whole world can now be illuminated with this. And like the Chassidis explains, on this dictum of the sages, when it says ad soif kol olam, which means to the end of the world, it means eternally, means forever. But the word means till the end of the world, till worldliness ends. The Rebbe explains. So the Chassidus explains, that through this we make an end and we eliminate completely the idea of the concealment, the hiding of godliness which is in the world and becomes a clearly worldly place. Because the world is called world, olam, from the term that means concealment, helem. So we end this helem, we end this and we're bringing in godliness. Now the Rebbe says, comes to the next mimer, that the previous Rebbe said in that time, which is called Su'i Dechem Kedesh, uplift your hands in holiness. There he brings the Gemara says there are three things that speak about what has to be immediately in direct proximity. And there he brings the one that it says that immediately after you wash your hands for bread, you have to make the blessing right away. Because the idea of hand washing is illustrative of the idea of rectifying and improving one's characteristics. Like he expounds upon in that mimer, where it says, uplift your and raise your hands to holiness. You have to uplift the hands, that's the idea of your attributes and your characteristics, in levels of holiness. Till they get stronger and stronger. Through that, then they become blessings to God, blessing God. Havaya, the God, this name of God, is the source of all blessing. Like it says, may God bless you from Zion. And then similar verses. Then the person then gets more energy, more light from God. And then we bless God. This blessing is from Zion. Now Zion means a particular place, so to speak, which in here is a reference. Here it's a reference to the quintessential point of the soul, which is called the level of Yechida. It's that spot that is always the most godly, and there is sometimes the most concealed, but it's the most potent, the most powerful, and it's the part that can never waver. Like it explains, and like Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah, that the word siyan, it means a marker. It means something which marks where something is. So that means a symbol or a sign. And here the Rebbe quotes the Zohar. This is another nuance here, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, he also says that you see godliness within him, but he says, I'm just a symbol within the world, because everything is godly, and he's just radiating it. So it's and that's what his symbol is. Shekoi al pnimius hanefesh. This goes on the innermost of the soul. The kishu v'kosher gam inyan mesidus nefesh. This is also connected with self-sacrifice, which comes from that quintessential point, that deepest part of the soul, is what evokes and brings out the self-sacrifice which someone has. In a way that it permeates in the ultimate, in the fullest fashion. Everything that we do serving God, in all three parts of the primary parts of serving God, of Torah, and serving and benevolence and prayer. This is also something which the word Zion speaks about. And like the Talmud says, and now I just want to point out, this is another nuance from that time where the Rebbe is talking about Mesidus Nefesh, self-sacrifice, for what we have to do and for what's right, etc. Like the verse in the Talmud, which says, we went over, they didn't have Google, but they read through all of the scripture, and we didn't find any place where Israel is called Zion, except in a particular verse, which is in in Isaiah 51, verse 16. It's quoted here in footnote 29. Place my word in your mouth, and with the shade of my hand I cover you. To plant the firmament and to found the earth. To say to Zion, you are my people. That verse is a reference to all three parts of Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim. So, that's talking about the ultimate of serving God, in all three things. They are the three pillars upon which the world stands. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim. And each one of these is a reference to in these things. And these are also the three things that which the world stands on it, with which the world exists. That's of course truth and peace and justice. The Rebbe says that over here too. That's also referred to in Pirkei Avos. So if you look in footnote 30 and 31, it's in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos in the first Mishnah, and in the 18th Mishnah, the final Mishnah. So the Rebbe says it's all alluded to over here, but it's also an obvious piece in our in the time when it was said. To the extent that serving God with the innermost of our soul permeates the whole body and everything that we do. Till the heel of the foot. As the piyat zoloich zayin piyat from the Mesidus Nefesh Yid. Here we have it in Yiddish, which stresses the nuance and the point that the heel should also be the heel of a Jew that has self-sacrifice. As it's well known and explained and expounded upon at length in the talks and the discourses of our Rebbes, our princes, our leaders. There God says that since Abraham listened to my voice and hearkened to what I say, etc., and he's bestowed all the blessings and the things that he gave him, so this is the same. Since is the word Akev. Akev also means the heel, because it's what comes along. And this also includes the end of days, which is also called the heel, and we know it as Ikvis of the Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach. And the drawing forth this blessing of may God bless you from Zion. Over there, God commands His blessing. It spreads forth into the whole world. Like the end of that verse that we quoted earlier, that actually a different verse, but we actually say it daily, that it comes forth like the the end of that verse, which says God, creator of heaven and earth, means the blessing spreads forth in the whole world. Dalet. Through us occupying ourselves and serving God in such a way that we have no rest. But we go from strength to strength, and mentioning again that that's in the Rebbe's chapter. Go from strength to strength. Chapter 84 until it becomes a true preparation. It hastens the end of that verse that will we appear and be seen by God in Zion speedily nowadays. Actually, so begula mitzvah shleima, with our true full redemption. Through our righteous Mashiach, those that repose in dust will once again rise and rejoice. Will be, and all of them, and especially the one who was incarcerated and liberated in this time. That's something that we're looking at now at this time. He's amongst them, meaning the previous Rebbe. Even the Kol Gadol Yeshuva, when we go in a way, like as we're promised in Jeremiah, that a great congregation, great group will return there. With our youth and our elderly. With our sons and our daughters, with their silver and their gold with them, like it says in Isaiah 60. Im kol harachush godel, withhold the great bounty, as we were promised that the original covenant between God and Abraham, that they bring with them from the exile. They go out with an outstretched strong hand, like it says how they left from Egypt. And they go on the clouds of heaven, let's say, to our holy land. Land which the eyes of God are upon it consistently and continuously from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. Shom, go for the Yerushalayim HaKodesh, and there in particular to Jerusalem, the holy city, Kiryas Melech Rav, the holy county, the holy place where the great king is. Shom Gufa, and there particularly Behar HaKodesh, the holy mount, Yerushalayim in Jerusalem, Ubamikdash Adonai Keinu Yadechan, and the sanctuary, the temple formed by God's own hand, Ubamheirav Yamenu Mamish, speedily in our days, actually so. Chayim.